I never thought I'd be grateful for insomnia, but the night security job at Millbrook Shopping Center paid double what I made at my day job. The place had been hemorrhaging money for years. Half the stores were empty, and the few remaining tenants were counting down to lease expiration. Perfect for someone like me, who needed quiet work and extra cash. The hiring manager, Mrs. Chen, was surprisingly eager to fill the position. The last guy quit without notice, she explained, avoiding eye contact. Just didn't show up one night. Left his keys and radio in the office. She handed me a thick manual. It's mostly walking rounds and checking doors. Nothing exciting. The security office was a cramped room behind the old Radio Shack, filled with monitors showing grainy feeds from cameras throughout the mall. Most of the screens flickered with static. The camera system was as outdated as everything else here. A logbook sat on the desk, its pages yellowed and brittle. I flipped through it, noting the previous guard's increasingly erratic handwriting in the final entries. Heard voices in the food court again. Checked, nobody there. Lights in Spencer's keep turning on by themselves. Electrical problem. Something's not right about the mannequins in the department store. The last entry was just 3 words. They're watching me. Mrs. Chen snatched the logbook away. Don't mind Marcus. He was imaginative. The job can get to you if you're not careful. Just stick to the checklist. My first night was uneventful. I did my rounds every 2 hours, checking doors and noting anything unusual. The mall after hours was eerily quiet, my footsteps echoing off the polished floors. The few remaining stores, a struggling GameStop, a vitamin shop, and a discount clothing store, stood like islands in a sea of empty storefronts with their security gates down. The fountain in the center court had been drained months ago, leaving a concrete basin filled with dead leaves and scattered coins. I made a note to have maintenance clean it out, though I doubted anyone would bother. By my 3rd night, I was getting comfortable with the routine. That's when I first heard the music. It was faint, coming from somewhere near the old department store at the far end of the mall. The melody was distorted, like an ice cream truck tune played through a broken speaker. I checked my watch, 2:47 a.m. I grabbed my flashlight and radio, then headed toward the sound. The music stopped as soon as I turned the corner into the West Wing. I stood in the darkness, listening, but heard only the hum of the air conditioning system. The department store's security gate was down and locked, same as every other night. I made a note in my log, possible electrical issue in West Wing. Investigate during day shift. The music returned the next night, same time, same location. This time I moved more quietly, trying to pinpoint its source. As I approached the department store, I could make out more details. It wasn't quite an ice cream truck melody. It was older, more carnival-like. The kind of tune that would play on a vintage music box. I pressed my ear to the security gate. The music was definitely coming from inside the store. I tried the gate, but it was locked tight. My keys didn't include one for the individual stores. Those were held by the respective managers. I'd have to wait until morning to report it. But when I called Mrs. Chen the next day, she seemed annoyed. The department store's been closed for 3 months, she said curtly. There's no power to that unit. You must have heard something from outside. I'm telling you, it was coming from inside the store. Look, maybe you should take a break. Get some sleep during the day. Night shifts can mess with your head. I wanted to argue, but I needed the job. I'll make sure to get more rest. That night, I decided to record the music on my phone. If Mrs. Chen wouldn't believe me, I'd have proof. I positioned myself near the department store entrance at 2:45 a.m., phone ready. The music started right on schedule. I held up my phone, hit record, and waited. Through the screen, I could see the recording levels jumping as the tinny melody played. But when I played it back, there was nothing but static and the distant hum of the ventilation system. I tried again, with the same result. The music was there, I could hear it clearly, but my phone wouldn't capture it. I was starting to understand why Marcus had seemed so agitated in his final log entries. The breakthrough came during my second week. I was reviewing the security footage from the previous night when I noticed something odd. The timestamp on monitor 7, which showed the West Wing corridor, jumped from 2:46 a.m. to 2:49 a.m. 3 minutes of footage were missing, exactly when I'd heard the music. I checked the other monitors. They all showed the same gap. Someone, or something, was interfering with the recording system every night at the same time. I started paying closer attention to the mall's layout. The directory near the main entrance showed the department store as Whitmore's, though I'd never heard of the chain. According to the faded map, it had been the mall's anchor store since opening in 1987. I did some research online, but found no trace of a Whitmore's department store anywhere. The next night, I brought a digital camera instead of my phone. Old school technology might work better than modern electronics. I also brought a crowbar. If I could get into the department store, I might finally get some answers. The music started at 2:47 a.m., same as always. I approached the security gate with my crowbar, but before I could start working on it, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The gate was already open. Not rolled up, but cracked about 2 feet from the bottom. Just enough for someone to crawl underneath. I'd checked this gate every night for 2 weeks. It had been locked every time. But now, with the music playing just beyond the entrance, it was inexplicably open. I ducked under the gate and found myself in what had once been a typical department store. Clothing racks stood empty, their metal frames casting long shadows in the darkness. The music was clearer now, definitely coming from deeper in the store. My flashlight beam swept across the walls, revealing something that shouldn't have been there. The store wasn't empty. Mannequins stood throughout the space, positioned as if the store was still operating. Men's, women's, and children's figures, all dressed in clothing that looked decades out of style. But it was their faces that made me step backward. They weren't smooth plastic like normal mannequins. These had detailed facial features, painted with an unsettling realism. And they were all looking in the same direction, toward the back of the store, where the music was coming from. I followed their gaze, moving deeper into the space. The music grew louder, but there was something else now. Voices. Multiple people talking and laughing, as if a party was in progress. The sounds led me to what had once been the store's customer service area. A wide counter separated the shopping floor from a back office. The music and voices were coming from behind that counter. I climbed over, my flashlight revealing a scene that defied explanation. The back office had been converted into a living space. Not a homeless encampment. This was organized, decorated, almost cozy. Old furniture arranged around a small table. Faded photographs hung on the walls. And in the center of it all, An antique music box played its tinny melody. The voices stopped abruptly. The music continued, but the conversation I'd heard moments before was gone. I was alone in a makeshift living space, but I had the overwhelming feeling that I was being watched. I photographed everything: the furniture, the photographs, the music box. My camera flash strobed across the walls, creating harsh shadows that seemed to move independently. When I reviewed the photos later, they showed only empty space. No furniture, no photographs, no music box. Just an abandoned office with water stains on the ceiling and debris scattered across the floor. But I knew what I'd seen. Someone was living in the department store. Someone who didn't want to be found. I made my way back to the security office, my mind racing. The logbook entries from Marcus suddenly made sense. He'd encountered this too, whatever it was. The voices, the music, the impossible things that couldn't be recorded or photographed. I opened the logbook to make my own entry, but stopped when I saw new writing on the page. In handwriting that wasn't mine. Welcome to the family. I didn't sleep that day. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those mannequins with their two real faces, all staring in the same direction. The message in the logbook kept replaying in my mind. Someone had been in the security office while I was in the department store. I called Mrs. Chen, but her phone went straight to voicemail. I tried the mall's main office, but no one answered. It was as if the entire management structure had vanished. That afternoon, I drove to the mall during business hours. The handful of remaining stores were open, but the corridors felt even more desolate in the daylight. I approached the department store and found the security gate locked tight, just as it had been every night except the last one. I peered through the metal slats but saw only darkness. No mannequins, no furniture, no sign of the living space I'd discovered. It was as if the entire experience had been a hallucination. But I knew better. I'd taken photographs, even if they hadn't turned out. I'd heard the voices, felt the presence of others in that space. Something was happening in Millbrook Shopping Center, and I was determined to find out what. I spent the rest of the day researching the mall's history. What I found made me question everything I thought I knew about the place. Millbrook Shopping Center had opened in 1987, as advertised. But according to old newspaper articles, it had been the site of a tragedy just 5 years later. A fire had broken out in the department store during Black Friday shopping. The sprinkler system had malfunctioned, and the emergency exits had been blocked by merchandise displays. 14 people had died, including several children. The department store, which had indeed been called Whitmore's, had never reopened. The space had remained empty ever since, a memorial to the victims. But here's what bothered me. The articles mentioned that the bodies of 3 victims had never been found. They were presumed dead, but the remains were never recovered from the wreckage. The fire had burned so hot that entire sections of the store had been reduced to ash. I found the victims' names in the obituary section. Margaret Chen, 34, and her 2 children, David and Susan. Margaret Chen. The same last name as my hiring manager. I called Mrs. Chen again, and this time she answered. "I was wondering when you'd figure it out," she said, her voice different than I remembered. Older, sadder. "You're more persistent than Marcus was." "What happened to Marcus?" "He joined us." just like you will. Mrs. Chen, I don't understand what's happening here. Who are you? I'm exactly who you think I am. I died in that fire 30 years ago, along with my children. But death isn't always the end, especially when you die in a place like this. Shopping centers are powerful anchors for human emotion. All that desire, all that longing for things we can't have. It leaves an impression. I wanted to hang up, to run, to pretend this conversation wasn't happening. But I needed answers. Why are you doing this? Doing what? Giving lonely people a purpose. A family. You've been alone for so long, working these dead-end jobs, going home to an empty apartment. We can offer you something better. You're dead. Are we? We think, we feel, we remember. We've created a little world for ourselves in the place where we died. It's not so different from being alive, except we don't have to worry about bills or jobs or any of the things that made life so difficult. The other guards, they're here with us. Marcus, and the one before him, and the one before that. They understand now. The living world is full of pain and disappointment. Here, we have everything we need. I hung up the phone, my hands shaking. I should have quit right then, should have walked away from the job and never looked back. But something kept me there. Maybe it was curiosity, or maybe it was something else. Maybe Mrs. Chen was right about the loneliness. That night, I returned to the mall with a different attitude. I wasn't afraid anymore, I was angry. These spirits, or whatever they were, had been manipulating me from the beginning. The job posting, the easy hiring process, the convenient absence of my predecessors. It had all been orchestrated to draw me in. I marched straight to the department store, expecting to find the security gate open again. Instead, I found something worse. The gate was gone entirely. The entrance to Whitmore stood wide open, revealing a space that looked nothing like the abandoned store I'd explored the night before. The interior was fully stocked and brightly lit, as if the store had never closed. Racks of clothing from the late 1980s and early 1990s filled the space. The mannequins were gone, replaced by actual customers browsing the merchandise. They moved slowly, mechanically, their faces blank and their eyes unfocused. I recognized one of them. Marcus, the previous security guard, was examining a rack of men's suits. He looked up when he saw me, and his expression was peaceful, almost blissful. "You came back," he said. "I knew you would. It's better here, isn't it? No stress, no worries. Just eternal shopping." "This isn't real," I said. "Reality is overrated. Here, we have everything we ever wanted. Look around, the perfect consumer paradise. We never have to leave." I backed toward the entrance, but found my path blocked by Mrs. Chen. She looked exactly as she had when I'd met her, except for her eyes. They were hollow, like holes burned through paper. "You can't leave," she said. "Not now that you know the truth. But why would you want to? You have a family here. People who understand you. I have a life. A real life. Do you? When was the last time someone called you? When did you last feel like you belonged somewhere? We can give you that. All you have to do is let go." I ran. not toward the exit, but deeper into the mall. I needed time to think, to figure out how to escape this nightmare. The corridors seemed to stretch endlessly, and I realized that the familiar layout of Millbrook Shopping Center was changing around me. New stores appeared where empty storefronts had been. A toy store filled with children's laughter. A bookshop with customers reading quietly in comfortable chairs. A restaurant where the smell of food made my stomach ache with hunger. But all of it was wrong. The customers moved too slowly, their faces too blank. The children's laughter had a hollow, echoing quality. The books in the bookshop were blank, their pages empty. The food in the restaurant was plastic, perfect, and inedible. I found myself in the central court, where the drained fountain had been replaced by a bubbling water feature surrounded by shoppers. They sat on benches, talking in low voices, their words overlapping into an unintelligible murmur. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" Mrs. Chen's voice came from behind me. This is what the mall was supposed to be. A perfect community where everyone belongs. It's a trap. Is it? Or is it salvation? You've been running from connection your whole life. Here, you don't have to run anymore. I turned to face her and saw that she was no longer alone. Marcus stood beside her, along with two other men I didn't recognize. The other security guards, I realized. All of them watching me with the same peaceful, empty expression. "What happened to you?" I asked Marcus. "I found what I was looking for," he said. "Purpose. Family. A place where I matter." "You're dead. Are we? We think, we feel, we experience joy. What more is there to life than that?" I looked around the court at the artificial paradise they'd created. It was seductive, I had to admit. No bills, no loneliness, no uncertainty about the future. Just endless shopping in a place where everyone was welcome. But it was also a prison. "I need to leave," I said. "The exits are still there," Mrs. Chen said. "But are you sure that's what you want? Go back to your empty apartment, your dead-end job, your life of quiet desperation. Or stay here, where you have a family who will never leave you." I thought about my real life. The cramped apartment, the bills I could barely pay, the isolation that had driven me to take a night job in an empty mall. They weren't wrong about the loneliness. I hadn't had a meaningful conversation with another person in months. But that didn't make this right. "I choose my own life," I said. "Even if it's imperfect." Mrs. Chen's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her hollow eyes. "Then you'll have to find your own way out." The mall began to change around me. The bright lights dimmed, the modern storefronts faded, and I found myself in the familiar corridors of the dying shopping center. But the layout was still wrong. Hallways led to dead ends, escalators went nowhere, and the exits I knew should be there had vanished. I pulled out my phone, hoping to call for help, but there was no signal. The screen showed only static, like the security monitors. I was trapped in a maze of retail space, with no way out and no way to call for help. The voices started again, coming from all directions. The other guards, calling my name, inviting me to join them. They sounded closer now, their footsteps echoing through the empty corridors. I ran blindly through the maze, looking for any familiar landmark. The GameStop, the vitamin shop, anything that might orient me. But the mall had become a labyrinth, its familiar geography twisted into an impossible configuration. Then I saw it, a red exit sign, glowing in the distance. I sprinted toward it, ignoring the voices that called for me to stop. The exit door was heavy, its push bar stiff with disuse, but it opened. I stumbled out into the parking lot, gasping in the cool night air. The mall looked normal from the outside, a dying retail center with most of its lights off. My car was where I'd left it, and the keys were still in my pocket. But as I reached for the door handle, I heard the music again. That carnival melody, faint but unmistakable, coming from inside the building. And underneath it, voices calling my name. I got in my car and drove away, but I could hear the music until I was miles from the mall. When I finally stopped at a gas station, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold my phone. I called Mrs. Chen's number, but it was disconnected. I tried the mall's main office, but the number wasn't in service. According to my phone's GPS, Millbrook Shopping Center didn't exist. The address showed only an empty lot, but I had the security uniform in my back seat and a paycheck stub in my wallet. I had proof that the place existed, that I'd worked there. Didn't I? I drove home and tried to sleep, but the music kept playing in my head. The next morning, I called in sick to my day job and went to the public library. I needed to research the mall fire to find proof of what I'd experienced. The newspaper archives confirmed everything Mrs. Chen had told me. The fire, the 14 deaths, the 3 missing bodies. But there was one detail that made my blood run cold. The fire had happened on a Tuesday, the same day of the week I'd been working the night shift. And according to the article, it had happened exactly 30 years ago. To the day. I never went back to Millbrook Shopping Center. I couldn't. Every time I drove past the address, I saw only an empty lot, just like my GPS indicated. But sometimes, late at night, I still hear that carnival music. And sometimes, in the darkness of my apartment, I wonder if I made the right choice. Because they were right about one thing. The loneliness is killing me, slowly but surely. And there are nights when I think about that perfect consumer paradise, where everyone belongs and no one is ever alone. There are nights when I almost wish I'd stayed.